Hi, and welcome to the Newbery Chronicles. This is a podcast where two people read through every Newbery medal-winning book, and then we talk about it. I'm Michael.
And I'm Rebecca. And today we actually have a third guest with us. You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jarvis. Nice to meet you.
Our son Jarvis is here to give us his thoughts on our book for today, which is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH.
Jarvis is going to be in and out of this podcast, so we'll hear back from him a little bit later. But first, we got to do the thing that would be boring to him, which is to talk about what we have read recently. Starting with the more exciting person who's read things. Rebecca, what have you read recently?
I don't know if it's more exciting.
It definitely is.
I think it's just a longer list. I'm going to fly through these because I have had the opportunity to finish quite a few books
Rebecca has been reading like a fiend.
Well, really, it's that in January and February, I was able to wrap up some books that we've been reading a while for a few things. So I read And It Was Good, Reflections on Beginnings by Madeleine L'Engle. This is the first book in her trilogy about the book of Genesis in the Bible. So it's a collection of reflections and essays about like her own narratives, but also pulling in stories from Genesis into it. I thought this was a lovely book. This was my first nonfiction of L'Engle's that I've ever read. There were definitely parts that I disagreed with her on, just some of her like interpretation of characters, but overall I got more out of this book than I was frustrated about. I think it's really beautiful. She is a wonderful, she's just a wonderful writer, and it's just crazy to me how L'Engle will have like such an expansive imagination and be such a strong theologian, and then also have this whole like side hustle of studying quantum physics and like time theory and all. It's just wild to me, and she just weaves all of that into this short little book.
Back when people who got STEM degrees actually cared about the arts.
Yeah, well,
seriously, like Carl Sagan, like there's a whole generation of like actual like artistically minded STEM people, and now we get what, Elon Musk? Boo, I say boo.
Right. So I really enjoyed this book. I also read I am part of my first official book club, which is kind of fun.
You say that to besmirch
I don't mean to
the nature
besmirch.
of the other book clubs you've been in.
I don't mean to besmirch. We've had, that's an excellent word, but that's not what I'm doing. So we have a little book club with me and Michael and our friend, and sometimes our other friend. But we don't like read a book a month and then meet. That's what I mean. I should say my first traditional book club. I should say that. And we read a book called How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, I guess is how you say his name. This book was very depressing. It was also a good book, I would say. I think it was really well written. But this is a collection of stories from different characters, many of which overlap, and you figure that out along the way.
What do you mean by overlap?
I'll explain. So there has been a terrible plague that has hit the world and is mainly impacting children. And the reason why it has hit the world is because of climate change, because this virus was frozen in, like, I'm trying to explain this.
One of the polarized caps?
Yes, but in bodies who had died and were mummified, like in the ice. And then when it melts, the virus is released. And
wait, so this is a virus that once ravaged humankind?
Yes.
Huh.
And died out, and then like comes back when they're unfrozen. So anyway, what I mean is that you get all these vignettes from different people, but then every once in a while you'll have reference to somebody else's story that you've heard because their life has somehow like touched the other person's, like in some way. So it's really neat to see all of that woven together. And there are little seeds of hope that are spread throughout, but it's mostly very, very sad. And I don't want to give a lot away because I don't want to take away from the story. If you read these, there are definitely like vignettes that really stood out to me and like made me grieve a little bit more than others. There's also, to me, the ending is very disjointed from the rest of the book because we kind of switched genres all of a sudden, but in a way to me that felt a little disjointed. But overall, I am glad that I read this book. It was definitely like outside of my comfort zone. It's not a book that I normally read, and I was glad to read it with friends. So I read The House on Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Don't come at me, you guys. I know this book is on every list of book talkers everywhere.
It's not on my list.
And everybody says if you liked Harry Potter as a child, you will love this book as an adult. This is a lovely little tale about a man that works for this company that has like all of these foster homes and like orphanages that they manage. And they send people to go and write reports and make sure that these orphanages are doing what they need to do. What you find out is what's really happening in these like orphanages and foster homes is they're really trying to control kids that have magical powers and really making sure that they are silenced or controlled in some way. And so dude is sent out to this like island where there are a lot of children who have extreme like magical powers or are very like worrisome to the people in charge. And so he is sent there to oversee like what's happening. Overall, this is a very sweet, fantastical story. I found it to be very predictable, and for me, that lessened the experience. I also am realizing I am not a big fantasy person. I do like Harry Potter, but Harry Potter has fantastical elements, but mostly it's about like real life people. I don't love this about myself, but I am finding that I think it is hard for me to get into stories that I have to do a lot of work to imagine what's going on, if that makes sense. Maybe that's because I have not read any fantasy that really catches me as an adult. But I'm willing to try more, but I don't think I'm going to read any more in the series. But you should if you're into that, because a lot of people love this. Michael and I read together with our small group at church. We read a book called 3 Mile an Hour God. I don't really
over the last like 12 months.
A long time. I don't really have a lot to say about this book. There were definitely bits of insight. It's a great book for discussion. I don't really feel that
it's hard to talk about as a whole.
It's hard to talk about as a whole.
Because it's like 30, it must be 30 or 40 little like 3-page homilies about a variety of things involving like Japanese nationalism, involving like, theodicy, involving, just basic like Christian virtue ethics. Like it runs the gamut. Mm-hmm. Some of them I connected with more than others. Yep. But yeah.
Same. Together, Michael and I read with our friend in our non-traditional book club. That is a real book club.
Pretty traditional. We read this book, which is very traditional.
We read Frankenstein, the 1818 text by Mary Shelley, and I'll probably let you talk more about that, but I really enjoyed it. I had read Frankenstein in high school and really enjoyed the story. I believe that I read the text that was published in the 1830s, so not the original. I could not tell you what was different because I have not read it in a very long time. But I really enjoyed reading this again. I think it's a great story. I think the themes are ones that we should continue to consider today, like what isolation does to people, what our responsibility is when we make mistakes, and really just like the harmful effects of ambition at just ambition's cost. So I thought it was a really great book, and I enjoyed reading it with Michael and our friend Andrew. I also read A Better Man by Louise Penny, and you guys, guess what? I guessed the murderer in this one from the very beginning.
Good job, Rebecca.
And that's never happened to me before. So I enjoyed that. I read a beautiful book called Hello, Beautiful.
It is beautiful.
But yes, by Anne
Hello.
Napolitano.
Does she have a flavor of ice cream named after her?
Nope. This book is about, what is this book about? Just loveliness. This book is about 4 sisters. I believe it's set in the 60s. And 2 of the sisters fall in love with the same man. And so it's not really just about that. It is about this family in general. And there are a lot of similarities to Little Women without this being like a Little Women, like a modern version of Little Women.
Joe and Amy both loving Lauren?
No, it's not like that, because I read that and I was anticipating that, and it's not like that at all. So it's like very much, really the similarity is that there are 4 sisters who know that they are 4 sisters, just like in Little Women. And they will explain how sometimes one of the sisters is like this character and one of the sisters is like this, and they all trade off on being Beth. So when they're like sad or depressed, they're like, I'm having a Beth day. And I think that's so cute. Like, this is not a cute book.
Dying from a terminal illness?
This is not a cute book. One of them does.
Oh, shoot.
But
that's a real Beth day.
this is not a cute book. It is a beautiful book about family. And what I really appreciated about this book is to me, it's very true to life about how people are. They make terrible decisions, and they are not always kind to each other, but they still love each other. And at the end of the day, you see a family that is dysfunctional, but they are still a family. And the reason why it's called Hella Beautiful is anytime any of them walks in the door, that's how their dad greets them. And it's just really, I thought it was a lovely
say My Little
book.
Women?
He doesn't. I feel like you're trolling me right now.
I'm not. You compared it to Little Women.
This was my first book by this author, and I've talked to my friends that have read more of hers, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of her books, 2 of which I will get to read once I finish the book that I'm reading right now, because I have them checked out on Libby. I read with Jarvis. We read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. That is probably our last Harry Potter book for a while, just because those of you who've read these books know the darkness and the murder really picks up in book 4. So we're going to take a break for a while. But overall,
R.I.P. Robert Pattinson.
I love Prisoner of Azkaban. Until the 7th book came out, the 3rd one was my favorite, and I still really enjoyed reading it again. I was really grateful for that experience. And what's really funny is Jarvis was just he's not on the pod right now, but he just had a lot of questions about time travel. And so we just got to explore, like, this is a really interesting concept that every author explores in different ways. So that was really fun. I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, which was a wonderful book. I felt like it drug on a little bit, but I really, really enjoyed this book. This was my first V.E. Schwab, who's also very popular right now. This is about a woman who, it starts in the 1700s, and she is betrothed to this person, like a marriage has been arranged for her. She's not ready to get married, and there is this woman in her life who's told her, like, never pray to the gods at night. But as she is, like, running from her wedding, she doesn't realize that it's now dusk, and she prays out to the gods, and the god who helps her is the god of the night, and makes an exchange that she can, basically what ends up happening is I can't remember exactly, but he says you can do what you want until you're done with your life, and then I will have your soul. So what happens is,
I would take that too.
Well, you would, but there's a catch.
Oh, there's always a catch.
But she doesn't realize that till after she's taken the deal.
About catches.
The thing is, she gets to live the rest of her life, but nobody remembers her. Nobody knows who she is. They will meet her, and then when a door closes or when they walk out the room or they come back, they don't know who she is. And so she has to every day figure out how to live, like how to get food, how to have housing, and she cannot build relationships along the way. until she meets someone who has also made a deal with the devil that kind of like
Wait,
cancels.
This is the devil?
Yes, kind of cancels each other out. So it's a very interesting story. Kind of like as you go along, it's a long book, longer than it needs to be, because kind of as you go along, it's like, okay, I realize where this is going. Let's get there. But I thought it was a really fun story. It was very, very fun. I also read Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. If you've been listening for a while, you might remember that I read Monday's Not Coming, also by her. She is a YA novelist who writes stories about Black girls in different settings. But both of these books, I've only read 2 books by her, but both in Monday's Not Coming and in Grown, she goes back and forth in time. And so you start at one part of the story that'll be present, and then you go back in time to get more of the backstory. And it's a really, I think, interesting way to tell the story, because you know what you're trying to figure out, but you figure it out as you go. And I think it was really well done. I think I enjoyed Monday's Not Coming better, but I still think this one was really great, and I'm looking forward to reading more by her. And then, last but certainly not least, I got to read a book by my friend, because my friend, Emily Riddle, writes Closed Door Romances, and she is local here to Knoxville, so it was really cool to go in the bookstore and pick up a book by my friend and buy it, and it was signed by her. It's called First Comes Love. It's part of the first book of a series called the Kissing series for her. And this is a book about a woman who is single, and meets this really cute guy at a baby shower. This woman has no desire to have children. This guy has 3 children. And it's about just their journey of finding love and figuring out how to shift your expectations for life. So it's very fun and delightful.
You're going to have to close that door if they have 3 children.
Well, yeah. If you like clean romance, then I think that you will like this book. So that's all of my list. What did you read, Michael?
So I also read 3 Mile an Hour Guide and Frankenstein, and I don't really have too much to say about either of those that has not already been said. So I'm going to move on in the interest of time, since I often ramble on these. The other 2 books I read in the interim between our last podcast are first, I reread, because I've read this book several years ago. I reread La Belle Sauvage, which is a book by Philip Pullman. It is the first book in the Book of Dust trilogy, which is a companion trilogy to Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy. A lot of trilogies, sorry. But you have probably heard, if you have heard of His Dark Materials, it is because of The Golden Compass, but then there's also The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass, and those are books that I really enjoyed and was challenged by as like I was probably a 9th grader or a 10th grader when I read those the first time, and then I reread them as an adult. Very interesting books that are kind of sort of retelling Paradise Lost through the kind of romantic reinterpretation of Paradise Lost, in which Satan is a tragic figure. So these are books that are set in a fantasy universe, and the fantasy universe involves a lot of things, but the most important ones are that every human being has like a familial spirit called a demon that takes the form of some sort of animal. And the other thing is that human consciousness is kind of a emergent phenomenon from a subatomic particle that is just called dust. And so the book ends up, or the trilogy of His Dark Materials ends up being about consciousness, about like human beings' relationship to God, and is kind of, Philip Pullman like consciously structured it as like an anti-Narnia, in which like a certain version of God is a malevolent version of God, and the church is a villain, and all this sort of stuff. But that's His Dark Materials. That was like 20 years ago. He has written a companion trilogy that the first book is La Belle Sauvage, and the last book, the third book, was just published this past fall, which I bought, but it had been so long since I read the first book in the companion trilogy that I felt I needed to reread it. So La Belle Sauvage is about this guy named Malcolm, and it takes place before the events of His Dark Materials when Lyra, who is the main character of the other books, the Golden Compass and all that, she's an infant, and so she's born, and for various reasons Malcolm has to take care of this infant. Malcolm is he's like 12 or 13, maybe 14 years old. I might be misremembering. And he lives in like Oxford, in this alternate universe, Oxford, England. And so he's like running around this college, but he's from like a working class family who run an inn. But he's kind of starting to make acquaintances with some scholars who are dealing with a lot of the like metaphysical stuff that becomes important in His Dark Materials. And Lyra, this baby, falls into his care at the same time that there is a kind of like a very long rain occurring, which will result in a flood eventually. And so he's got this little boat that he scurries around in Oxford. I don't know anything about Oxford, but the way this book describes it, there's a lot of waterways and stuff. But those waterways become a lot bigger because there's a flood. And this flood eventually kind of opens up the boundaries between like the kind of modern world and the fairy realm. And so Malcolm, in protecting Lyra, has to go on this kind of journey down this flooded river in which kind of boundaries between fantasy and reality are blurred. And it was good. I remember when I first read this back in whenever it was published, 2017, I guess. I remember thinking that it was not what I thought it was going to be because it doesn't really directly tie into any of the broader, except for there being the infant Lyra. It doesn't tie into any of the bigger plots or themes of His Dark Materials. And it instead is mostly like a coming of age story in which like this child, Malcolm, is forced to encounter forces beyond his own reckoning, whether that be actual like realistic, human powers who are very like malevolent and destructive that we might see in our own world, or whether that be like fairies and giants who kind of come out of this collapse between like the fantasy and reality world. I really enjoyed it the second time around. I think Philip Pullman is a really good writer. He is a little bit dry in terms of characterization. A lot of times his characters are very pragmatic and goal-oriented. But I think that like for the kind of characters that he writes, like if you're like into his style, which his older books are all mystery novels to my knowledge, that I read. If you're into that style and kind of like his musings on like the nature of reality and all that sort of stuff, like ultimately I enjoyed revisiting this, and I'm going to read I'm currently starting the second book, and I'm going to hopefully finish rereading that soon and then move on to the third book. But as a kind of standalone story, this is a really nice, like weird, like kind of dark fantasy sort of book that I enjoyed. The second book that I read is called Life After Cars, which is very different from, well, in some ways not different. There's never an automobile mentioned in La Belle Sauvage. But Life After Cars is a nonfiction book written by three authors. Aaron Naperstek, I don't know his name, how to pronounce it, so I'm sorry, Aaron. Doug Gordon and Sarah Goodyear. And the reason I know how to pronounce those other names so well is that they are the hosts of the podcast, The War on Cars, which is all about the ways that cars have ruined modern society. And this book is about the same topic. In fact, it covers a lot of the same material that The War on Cars does. And so I checked this out of the library thinking it would be a little quick read, which it was. It's a fairly slim book, and it's almost like a manifesto, like they hate cars. Here are all the reasons why cars are bad. They cause pollution. They affect human psychology in deleterious ways. They kill people. They have reshaped urban life and suburban or rural life in ways that are counter to human flourishing. And it lays it all out very well, I think. I, too, am a fellow hater of cars. I think that car-dependent society is very destructive to human life, and also I just am offended by it aesthetically. I think cars are ugly, cars are loud, cars are rude, and I too would like to lead a life after cars. I think that this book, if you're into the whole like new urbanism, like transit kind of subculture / like special interests that I have been in for decades at this point, it's not going to give you a ton of new information, but it does package it really succinctly and in ways that are explicitly made so that you can share it very easily with other people who may not be quite as radicalized as you are against the automobile. And it's explicitly made to be a book that can kind of span that divide, where it is both enjoyable to read for people who are well versed in the subject while also being a good introduction to the topic for other people. So if you want to know why I hate cars so much, and if you want to know why it would be so much better if we could just walk, bike, and train everywhere, you should read Life After Cars and listen to the War on Cars podcast. Although I will say that like the War on Cars podcast is not as entertaining as this book. I think that they're better writers than they are podcasters.
All right.
I will say like the podcast has a tendency to be
maybe
maybe a little bit
true for us.
Maybe a little bit austere and dry. Yeah, I know. Wouldn't it be awesome if we were as good at writing as we are at podcasting?
One of us is, and it's you.
I don't think I'm a good writer. That's what I've read though.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the author.
So wait. You know what? Did we mention
the book that we're doing?
The book that we're reading? I don't believe we did.
Well, that's sad.
Yeah.
We are covering the 1972 winner, Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH.
I believe.
Which you probably know if you read the title of this episode.
Yeah, but it's nice to say it out loud too. It's polite.
So let's talk about the author, Robert C. O'Brien.
Fake name.
Which was actually a pen name for Robert Leslie Carroll Conley, which is a fun name. We'll talk about his pen name in just a minute, why he chose that name.
I think we need to bring back men being named Leslie. That was kind of like a thing that used to happen.
Mm-hmm. He was born in 1973 in Brooklyn, New York.
He was born in 1973?
Nope. That's a mistake.
I was like, he traveled back in time to write this.
Sorry, guys. He was born in 1918.
You almost made me do a spit take with my water.
He died in 1973. Spoiler alert. Sorry, guys.
He had Benjamin Button syndrome. He was born as an old man.
It's good that you were paying attention. He was born in 1918 to a wealthy Irish Catholic family. He went to Williams College in 1953, but he left in his second year. And after this, he went through what he called a breakdown period until he finally went home in disgrace, which is very sad. He got it together. He later studied for a while at Juilliard, which I have no idea what his art was that he got into Juilliard for. I have no idea because Wikipedia didn't tell me. But he eventually received his BA in English at the University of Rochester in 1940. So after graduation, he worked for a little bit at an ad agency. Then he worked for Newsweek. He later worked for the Washington Times Herald and then Pathfinder, so doing a lot of journalism work. And then in 1951, he started working for National Geographic, and he actually worked there until his death. The reason why he used the name O'Brien when he started writing books is that was his mom's maiden name, and he, in his contract with National Geographic, it forbade him from publishing with any other company. So basically, this gave him anonymity to write books. So
he was breaking his contract
by writing? He was breaking his contract,
That's wild.
But changed his name. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. In the 60s, he developed glaucoma, and because of this, he could no longer drive for work. So that goes along with Life After Cars. So what he did was he moved his whole family closer to his office in D.C., And because he saved so much time from not having to commute, he started writing children's novels.
Look, if we
time.
had robustly funded public transportation, think about how much more children's literature would be written.
Right. So his first children's book was The Silver Crown, which he wrote in 1968. And then... Oh, you have?
I've read a few books by Mr.
Oh, that's
O'Brien.
so cool. And then in 1971, he wrote Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, and then obviously won the Newbery for that in 1972. This is so cool. Or maybe it's not cool. I don't know. I just think this life of anonymity is really neat. But upon winning the Newbery, his comments at the ALA annual conference were actually read by his editor so that he could maintain anonymity.
I'm imagining him being...
just that he couldn't publish under his name. He could not write. So
That's
he totally,
awesome.
like, I don't know.
I'm imagining him showing up to the award show in, like, the glasses and the nose and mustache.
Yeah.
Like...
His last two novels, A Report from Group 17 and Z for Zachariah.
I've read Z for Zachariah.
Well...
It's on our bookshelf over there.
What's interesting is they were actually intended for adults, even though Z for Zachariah received an Edgar Award for Best Juvenile Mystery.
I mean,
it was published posthumously.
Dang.
So I'm wondering...
Died right after his birth.
I'm wondering if people just assumed it was a children's novel because that's what he had read, so that's how it was, like, promoted. But I found that to be interesting. His daughter, Jane, published the 2 sequels to Mrs. Frisby, one of which Michael has read, which you can tell us about.
Actually, I held off in what we read because that is another book that I read.
They were titled Rascal and the Rats of NIMH.
Which is the one I read.
And R.T., Margaret, and the Rats of NIMH. So O'Brien and his wife, Sally, married in 1943, and they eventually had 4 children. What's crazy is that any time Sally wrote about her husband, she did so under the name Sally O'Brien in order to not give him away.
Wow, this is a wide-ranging conspiracy.
I'm curious, like, I wonder if after he died, they were just like, hey, actually, this is who... I don't know. It's wild to me. But he died of a heart attack in 1973. Not the year he was born, as previously
I hope it wasn't. That would be a brief and unhappy life.
So why don't you give us a summary of this book?
Yeah, so Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. It is about... It's kind of halfway about Mrs. Frisby. You know, the title really tells it all. You've got Mrs. Frisby, who is a field mouse, who lives in the field of a farmer. And they kind of are seasonally located. During the wintertime, they will locate themselves close to the farm. And then during the summertime, when the farmer plows his field, they will move away outside of the realm of the plow so they don't get all plowed up in the crops. And unfortunately, in this one winter, as the winter is kind of thawing into spring, her son, is it Timothy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, her son Timothy falls ill, and she's really worried, really concerned that he is not going to be able to move before the farmer starts tilling the field. And so the family will, obviously face like a lot of danger from the plow. And so Mrs. Frisby goes to, well, she first meets a crow named Jeremy. Our son Jarvis's favorite part of the story. And Jeremy takes her to an owl, and the owl says, you got to go talk to these rats who live around the farmhouse. The rats can help you. And he mentions, so Mrs. Frisby was married to another rat, or another mouse at one point, but he's dead. And he mentions that her husband knew these rats. And so she presents herself and says, hi, I am Mr. Frisby's wife, Mrs. Frisby. They will give her the time of day, because otherwise the mice and the rats don't really talk to each other. And so Mrs. Frisby goes up to these rats, and she says, hey, I need help, and my husband was Mr. Frisby. And they're like, oh, Mr. Frisby, we loved Mr. Frisby. Let's take you into our lair. And so they go into her, she goes into the lair, and it turns out that these rats, are really technologically advanced. They have like an air filtration system, and they have all this machinery and stuff under this rose bush, and they're like, what do you call it, like a rat's den? I keep thinking of Warren, but that's for
I have no
that's
idea.
for rabbits. Anyway, in their little rat's hole, they have all this advanced machinery, and they then, here's the half of the title that's about the Rats of NIMH. They talk about that their backstory. The leader of the rats is named Nicodemus, and he recounts how he used to live under like a farmer's market or something like that, him and a bunch of rats. And then one day in the farmer's market, a bunch of scientists came and scooped up a bunch of the rats and took them to a lab called NIMH, which is as Rebecca actually just off the cuff proposed.
The National Institute of Mental Health.
National Institute of Mental Health, which is a real institution that apparently did similar experiments on actual rats, but with less compelling results, as in this book.
To our knowledge.
To our knowledge, that's true. They keep it pretty hush-hush in the book. But in the book, they do these experiments on the rats where they give them these injections that like basically increase their intelligence. And the rats learn how to read, and they learn how to reason, and like become super intelligent rats. And because they're super intelligent, they're able to escape NIMH and go out into the world and become just like free rats, but also with their super intelligence, able to like kind of create a better rat society than the living under the farmer's market was. And so because they're super intelligent and have all these machines, they have the ability to take Mrs. Frisby's home, which is basically inside the cinder block, and move it to a place where the plow will never get it. So she doesn't have to do the whole like moving seasonally thing. And then her son Timothy can just stay inside the cinder block and not have to worry about leaving and risking his health any further because he's ill. The only thing that has to happen is that Mrs. Frisby has to go put sleeping powder in the farmer's cat's bowl, because there's this cat
named Dragon,
and the cat will, of course, get the mice and the rats if the cat sees them, unless the cat has sleeping powder put in its bowl and it's just sleepy. And so Mrs. Frisby finds out this is how her husband actually died. Her husband was also in the NIMH experiment because apparently they picked up mice in addition to rats. And so her husband was all buddy-buddy with the Rats of NIMH and would help them out with stuff, including like going and putting the cat to sleep. And one day the husband wasn't as successful as we would have wanted with putting the sleeping powder in the cat's bowl, and he was killed. Mrs. Frisby didn't know any of this. But she must retrace her husband's footsteps in order to save her family from the plow, specifically Timothy. And so as she is putting the sleeping powder in the bowl, she is caught by one of the kids of the farmer, and who's going to keep her as a pet. And they overhear that the scientists have gotten wind of the Rats of NIMH being here because of like a splinter faction with the rats from a rat named Jenner. It's not really important to go into what it is at the moment, but basically there's a schism in the Rats of NIMH, and one of the rats' schisms halves like goes off, and they end up getting electrocuted, and the scientists realize these are the rats that we once were doing experiments on. And so they're like, the other half of the rats must be over here in the farmhouse for some reason. And
well, they think that it's the scientists that are trying to catch them. It's
unclear. There's some ambiguity about whether or not they just want to exterminate rats that they view as like perhaps carrying diseases, or whether or not these are the scientists who want to come. But they assume the worst. Well, whatever the case, the rats are going to be exterminated or caught and taken back to NIMH. It's unclear what's going to happen. And Mrs. Frisby overhears this because she's been caught and turned into a pet for like 12 hours or something like that. The rats come and save Mrs. Frisby, and she tells them about the plan. And the rats are upset because, even if they can just run away, all the exterminators are going to come and find all their machinery and stuff, and then they'll know, like, oh, these rats are escaped from NIMH. And so they have to destroy all the machinery and act as if they're regular rats while the exterminators are there. And in doing so, not all of them escape alive because the exterminators like gas their hole with poison. And there's a couple of rats who like try to save the other rats and die. And the rest of the rats...
One rat dies.
I thought 2 rats died.
No. 2 didn't get out at first, but Brutus gets out, and the one rat
okay.
dies.
Well, anyway, it's not a 100% successful mission. But the rats do escape with the help of Mrs. Frisby and the unnamed rat who saves the other rat. And Mrs. Frisby's house is moved. Timothy is saved. And they live happily ever after.
I got it wrong. This says 8 of the... Well, regardless, 1 to 2 rats dies.
I'm saying 2 because in the sequel that I read, they mentioned 2 having died.
Okay, then that's correct. I just misunderstood.
But, at any rate, that is the plot
Yeah.
of Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. Rebecca, what did you like about this book?
I thought this was a really fun story. I thought the pacing was really good. I like that it's multiple stories within a story, but not in a way that feels disjointed. So the frame is really Mrs. Frisby learning about the secret identity of her husband, and also all the work of these rats that are like really close to her. So I thought I was never bored in this book. Like, I don't think there are any parts where I was like, gosh, this is just really dragging along. I think the time with Jeremy and visiting the owl is unique. The thing about this book is, like, I always thought something really terrible was about to happen to Mrs. Frisby. Like, I thought this owl is going to try to attack her when she goes to talk. I know. So I do like how O'Brien's kind of subverting your expectations a little bit as the reader, but like keeping you engaged the whole time. I think that was really skillfully done. I also, this book is just full of adventure. So like, you've got a mouse riding on a crow. You've got the rats and their secret adventures, and her getting to witness that. So anyway, it's just a jam-packed book. I really appreciate the rats' compassion. I think that they could just isolate themselves and not care. And you could argue that they only care about Mrs. Frisby because her husband Jonathan was part of their crew. But I truly do feel like they care for the well-being of the other creatures, and I don't know if that's because they've had all these scientific experiments done on them and they're like more intelligent, compassionate as a result, but I don't know. I choose to believe that they just kind of want to share the wealth, and they're also just concerned about like how can we truly live on our own and not just by stealing from other people. And so I just think those are interesting questions about what happens as we develop.
Well, that was a part of the plot that I left out, which is that the rats were planning on moving anyway. Yeah. They had planned like basically a place out in the country where they could make their own like agricultural projects so that they wouldn't have to just like take food from the farmers' crops.
Mm-hmm. I do think I have a little question mark. I'm not saying this is definitely a conclusion to draw, but just a question mark about, is there some classism in this in terms of like what education does for somebody, that it makes you like a better person, or it makes you more compassionate, or it makes you more, I don't know. I think that that's just something to think through. I'm happy to completely be wrong about that, but it's just a question mark I have. What I also really like about this book is there is like high conflict, but there are no villains. The cat is acting in his nature, that he would eat mice and rats. The boy just wants a pet. He doesn't want to hurt Mrs. Frisby. He just wants a pet and a companion.
I did always want a pet mouse too. My mom would say no.
Really? Well,
Yeah.
I would agree with her. The scientists are just trying to learn and understand, and I do think there is a question about like ethical studies and things like that. But they're also not cruel to these rats and mice.
Get off easy. Some of the things that happen to real rats and the
right.
labs are
in
horrific.
this book, I'm not saying in real life, like there are no villains when it comes to like animal rights and scientific testing and that sort of thing. But in this book, I think it's just really interesting how you can write a story that has like really good, compelling conflict, but no true like villains. I thought that was really cool. And then I just really enjoyed seeing the little underworld of the rats, like their little secret society that they've built. I thought that was really cool. What did you like?
You didn't read this as a kid, did you?
No, I did not. This was my first time.
Okay, so I read this book a lot as a kid. I remember I probably read it a few different times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I just thought it was cool, the super intelligent rats. I thought that was neat, and that they formed their own society. And I ended up reading a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, I ended up reading 2 other Robert C. O'Brien books, which I've already talked about, The Silver Crown and Z for Zechariah, and really liked those too. And so this was a revisit for me, and I hadn't read it probably since I was like 12 or something. It had been a long time since I read Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. And so some things that I still liked, I liked the idea of super intelligent rats making their own little society. It's fun. I liked the it's a short book, but you get it's jam-packed with interesting characters. Like I like Jeremy, who's kind of like this kind of scatterbrained, like youthful crow, versus the owl. There's this amazing passage that I didn't ever remember. This was like a complete rediscovery for me, but I think it's one of my favorite passages in the book, where the owl talks about Mrs. Frisby's home and how like he can relate to her problem of having to move homes because the farmer is plowing, because he's an old owl and he's so used to living in this tree, but he's started to realize that the tree is dying, and he's just going to live in this tree until it collapses around him and he will die with the tree, even though he knows he should move. And I just think that that's such a wonderful little bit of like characterization where so much of this book is about how people make places, find meaning in places, and like just kind of dig into a sense of place. And so like the rats want their own place rather than being ancillary or auxiliary to the farmers or the farmer's market or the farmer's field or whatever. Mrs. Frisby needs her home to be safe. This owl needs his home to be safe. And in each case, like there are trade-offs to what it takes to make an actual ecosystem or an environment a home, and the kind of threats that they pose. And like one of the big things about NIMH when they're in the lab is that like this is just this like horrific like imposition on their autonomy and on their ability to make a place a home. Like NIMH is never a home. NIMH is a place where they learn a great deal that they take with them, but from the very beginning, they're like set on like this is not where we are meant to be, and I don't know. I just think that's interesting. It's like in a lot of ways like a book about like people's relationship to their environment, and like even like the farmer with the relationship to his environment, where the farmer is farming, but in doing so, like kind of destroying or potentially destroying lives of those around him, like the lives of these animal creatures. And, the farmer's relationship to the world around him is a different perspective than that of like the mice and the rats. And they're at conflict, not because of like ill will, but because of how they relate to each other in the environment. And I just found that really interesting. I liked, again, like I really like that passage where it's several chapters where they're recounting what happened to them in NIMH, and I just think it's fun. Like you're in the rat's perspective, like inside the experiments, because I think that there are so many science fiction books about the scientists, right? But it's really interesting to be inside the animals' perspective, and like the way that it describes the animals, like growing recognition of like, oh, these are the things that they're trying to teach us. They're trying to teach us how to read. They're trying to teach us how to reason, and all this sort of stuff is really interesting. Although, like, as an adult, you can kind of see through it. Like, for some reason, the rats still think in English. And so, like, all they have to do is connect the sounds to the words that they think, and then they learn how to read. Whereas, obviously, like, animals don't speak the same language as us, if they speak language at all. And so, like, I realize now as an adult, like some of this is simplified or whatever, but I do think it's interesting, and an interesting it's an interesting experiment or exploration of like a change of POV from what you would be expected of. And I don't know how much Robert C. O'Brien was like interested in the politics of his time, but like I can't help but think like early 1970s, late 1960s, this is like the beginnings of like the modern ecological movement and like animal rights and things like that. Like this definitely feels like of that time of like Silent Spring and the formation of the EPA and like all this sort of stuff where the kind of modern, like the human project of modernity has casualties in the natural world. And that in the United States comes to a head in the 1960s and 70s with like rivers catching on fire because of industry or like, the cruelty toward animals in, scientific experiments or in, R&D and corporations and stuff like that. And I don't know. I don't know if he intended it to be tying into that, but to me it felt like sociologically like tied to that that kind of like movement and time period. And I just thought that was interesting. I just still think it's a good story. Like I love stories where a person starts out looking for a small thing, in which case like Mrs. Frisby starts out trying to look for medicine for her son, Timothy. And through that, there's a kind of snowballing effect of like, you get this huge world that comes out of it, And I just love it when stories unfold like that. And like Rats of NIMH, like Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH unfolds in that way. And I think I really connected to that as a kid and thought that was cool. And I still think that that's enjoyable now, You start off with a small quest, and that small quest like peels back the nature of the world, and you learn all this stuff about like the depth of the depth of history around you and like the larger forces at play. I thought that was all cool. Well, Jarvis, this is your first time on the podcast, and this is also the first time that one of our children has actually read the same book that we did. So, Jarvis, do you want to tell us what did you like about this book?
My favorite part was when Mrs. Frisby meets Jeremy.
Oh, nice. All right, thank you, Jarvis, and hopefully he'll be able to weigh in on other books too. We're kind of in the unique position of our kids starting to be old enough to read these books, which are actually intended for kids anyway, instead of two cranky adults just jabbering on. But
and Jarvis, is there anything that you didn't like about this book?
The part that didn't make sense to me was when Julie said A. Why did she say it 3 times anyway?
Yeah, I think that they were trying to train the rats, but I don't know. All right. Well, that about says it all, doesn't it? Anyway, Rebecca, is there anything you didn't like about this book?
Yeah, they were kind of like Jarvis. There were just some parts that I didn't quite understand. I don't know if I didn't like them, but I didn't understand them. I don't really understand the purpose of the ambiguity behind who the scientists are, whether they're from NIMH or whether they're exterminators, because it's clear to me that they would only be interested in finding... So they find out about the rats, the schism, in the hardware store because it appears that these rats are trying to do something really intelligent and don't realize that some machinery is still plugged in and accidentally electrocute themselves. So if they were from NIMH, it would make sense that they would reach out to the farmer family. I don't know if we ever get their names.
We do. Fitzgibbon.
Fitzgibbons. Why they would reach out to them and say, like, hey, do you have rats on your property? We need to catch them. So, to me, it would only make sense if they were from NIMH and then reaching out to the Fitzgibbons. If that is the case, why would they want them killed? Would they not want them captured and brought back to the lab to do further studies? But if they're releasing gases, which they do, to kill the rats, I don't understand that part at all.
So you're saying, like, if they were the scientists, they wouldn't have done the gas.
Yes, but if they're not the scientists, they wouldn't have pursued finding more rats.
Yeah, that's true.
So I feel like I just don't get what's happening there. I also did not understand why they needed to, like, it doesn't make any sense to me why the rats needed to be there. Why the exterminators needed to see some rats. If they found, or why they needed to even put rat garbage in there. Like, if they destroy their home so that they couldn't see, like, this whole underworld that they've created, why could they not just run and create a world somewhere else? Like, they're not going to pursue them in the woods. I don't understand. It just feels like the rats, the two rats that I thought was one rat, who saved Brutus, I just feel like they died pointlessly, and I don't get it.
I don't know that this actually fixes the kind of like logical, you know, logically suspect things that you're talking about. But like, I guess what I thought is that the rats have lived their lives after having escaped NIMH, just assuming we could one day be taken back to NIMH. Mm-hmm. You know, in the way that, like, if you escaped from jail, you would just be constantly assuming that, like, oh, they're out to get me, they're going to drag me back to jail or something like that. And so, like, I guess in my mind, like, their thought process is we cannot leave the possibility that, or we cannot leave any sort of trace that we are existing out in the world, or else, like, there's a chance that the NIMH people would come and hunt us down. Like, I don't know if that makes any of the stuff make sense.
No, that's what I'm saying. If you destroy the trace, why do you need to be there when they get there? Just go.
Right. Yeah.
I just...
You mean instead of, like, why do they have to pretend to be, like, just normal rats?
Yeah, like, remember some of them stayed behind because they were like, what's going to happen if they see a rat's den but don't see any of us rats?
Yeah.
Oh, it would be terrible. But I don't really understand.
I think they're assuming that it's the NIMH people, and they don't want the NIMH people to know that they're out and about.
What I'm saying, okay, we don't have to, like, keep talking about this. To me, it doesn't make sense of how they would know. If they escaped to the woods, how would they find them? How would they know to pursue them? Where would they know to look? None of that makes any sense to me. But anyway, what did you dislike?
Well, I mean, I think that all that, I'm not really arguing with you. I think that, like, all that stuff is, like, fairly flimsy as a way to, like, kind of, like, manufacture a conflict, or a climax, I guess I should say. But I guess I was just saying, like, I think what it's going for is that kind of sense of paranoia that, like, we're, like, it's almost like presenting the rats as, like, an oppressed group, right? And that also goes to, like, their need to be, like, they're almost being a commune, like, out in the, and again, like, I'm thinking about the historical time period, like, if you think about, like, in the aftermath of, like, the kind of collapse of the civil rights movement surrounding, like, you know, after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and Martin Luther King is assassinated and stuff like that, like, there are, like, separatist groups, you know, who, like, basically form, like, you know, commune, like, you know, separatist environments where, you know, they're like, you know, America will never accept us, so we have to have self-sufficiency. And I guess I'm kind of, like, imprinting that on the rats, but I don't think that it is fully fleshed out.
I understand why they're leaving. I don't understand. We don't have to keep hashing this out. But
no, I'm saying it's not well explored,
okay.
Is what I'm saying. And maybe that, like, social implication is not meant to be the case. But, like, one of the things I couldn't keep myself from thinking about is that there are, if you do think about it in terms of, like, you know, kind of post-civil rights, like, you know, fatalism about integration and stuff like that, there are weird implications surrounding, like, these rats. And there's, like, I don't know if this is intended, but it kind of, like, just is maybe grandfathered in by the nature of, like, what science was in the mid-20th century. But, like, there are eugenics implications with some of the stuff that they talk about with the rats, you know, where it's like, you know, is, like, they act as if intelligence is this, like, objectively measurable thing that is, like, biological in nature and stuff like that. They're like, if we just give these rats these shots, they become smarter, and this makes them more civilized. And, like, I don't love that as an implication, even though, like, as a device, like, I think it's, like, fairly harmless. But, like, when I think about it in terms of, like, is this like a metaphor, or like is this a echo
Well, that's the classist question I had.
Yeah, and not just classist, but like again, like they kind of represent. You could represent them as like racial minorities, right? Who are also experimented on and viewed as subhuman and things like that. And it's like the book does not question the fact that like, well, obviously the Rats of NIMH are more civilized and more intelligent because they've had these experiments done on them and they've been made bigger brain sizes or whatever. There's kind of like a phrenology like assumption being made there, and it's like the shape of your skull and things like that, you know, determine whether or not you're capable of civilization. And I don't know. I mean, it's like ultimately just like a sci-fi device, but I think that like a lot of these science fiction tropes emerged in the late 19th and early 20th century when these were just kind of like the ideas people assumed. And so they became tropes based on people's assumptions. And that was not something that like was not in my brain as a kid. And for all I know, is not in Robert C. O'Brien's head as well. But like as an adult reading it, kind of knowing that history, I felt like this kind of buys in some of the same premises as that. And so when you get to the fact of like the rats trying to be separatists and the rats like viewing themselves as like we can never be with other rats anymore because we're too smart and we would be like ostracized by these other rats or whatever. Like I don't think that that's an element that the book thinks about that much, to be honest. And it has things that I think it either should think about or just maybe not gesture at those things. That being said, like as a kid, I thought all this stuff was very interesting, and I love, like I mentioned earlier, I really like the idea of like all the rats and stuff having like super intelligence. So I don't really know how you get to super intelligent rats without like buying into some of the basic like sci-fi, colonialist eugenics assumptions that are in that. But like I said earlier, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm saying like I also don't think that that's well explored in the book. But I also, so this is another thing I didn't really think about that much. I had forgotten how much Mrs. Frisby is basically shunted to the side as a character for the majority of the novel. Like I remembered her like this is this tenacious mother who's trying to save her kids and all this sort of stuff, which she is, but she's a lot more docile than I remembered. She's like told what to do most of the time, which in her position makes sense in the way that the novel set up the plot. But I remembered her being a much more central character than she is. And in some ways, she's almost like an audience surrogate so that the rest of the story can kind of unfold, rather than her being an active agent in the story. And the really only active thing that she does is starting to seek out... at the beginning, when Timothy's sick, she's like, I got to figure out how to save Timothy. And then the only other thing she does is, I have to put the sleeping powder in Dragon's food. Everything else, all the other characters tell her and do for her. And I don't know, like, again, reading it through the lens of an adult, like, I can kind of, like, put this in a historical time period where, like, she's just kind of viewed as a housewife in this book.
And all the, like, leaders in this rat community are male.
Right, and those are the people who have plans.
Right.
Like, she does not devise plans. Like, she does take meaningful action, but she has to go to a male owl who tells her to go to a male rat who only connects to her because of her husband, and then tells her...
And her friendship with Mr. Ages, the male mouse.
Yeah, which we didn't really talk about, but he's like a
doctor.
Like a pharmacist kind of person. But at any rate... I like Mrs. Frisby as a character, but like seeing this through the eyes of an adult, I can kind of realize like, okay, this is the late 1960s. Like women's liberation is only just getting started. There are kind of like historical and social assumptions being baked into who this character is. And I remembered her taking more of an active role than this book actually has her take. And I don't think that's like a fatal flaw in the book, but it feels very of its time to me, in a way that I had kind of not really clocked before.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about whether we give this book thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm still thumbs up on this book. I would say I'm not as enthusiastic about it as I was as a kid because I really got a lot. I really liked this book a lot as a kid, and I think I liked it. But there's a lot of other books that we've read in this Newberry podcast that I like better.
Yeah.
Which, if you had asked me like blind, like remember from childhood, like what are your favorite Newberry books? Like this probably would have been one of them that I named, and I don't think I would say that now.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. That's kind of disappointing when you revisit it.
It's okay. I mean, it is what it is. I'm not like crushed because I haven't really, I hadn't read this book in 20 years, but.
Well, I really enjoyed this book, even though there are some spots that I think are just plot holes. But I still give this a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Do you give this book a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
I don't know. Both.
Both.
No,
One thumbs
sideways.
up, one thumbs down.
Sideways.
Jarvis, thank you so much for sharing. We value your input.
Okay.
Can I take a minute to talk about the sequel that I read?
Go ahead.
So I had kind of in the back of my mind as a kid understood that there were sequels to Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. And I never was able to get my hands on them. And I also didn't try that hard because this is kind of like a self-contained book. It kind of feels like there's not really a compelling reason to seek out a sequel, especially because I knew the sequel was not written by the same author. It is, in fact, written by his daughter, who is named, I think it's Leslie Connolly, right?
No, it is Jane. Her name's Jane.
Okay. So at any rate, I'm actually blanking on the title of the... Is it Rasco and the Rats of NIMH?
Yes, Rasco and the Rats
Yeah,
of
by
NIMH.
Jane Leslie Conley. And I thought this book
I
was
guess because
okay.
her dad was dead, she could use her real last name.
I guess so, because this came out in 1986.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's
And
cold
he
in the
died in
ground
73.
by then. Yeah, the National Geographic goons had since laid off his trail.
Man.
But, so this book takes place after the events of this book, obviously, because it's a sequel. But Timothy, it's like a few years later, and Timothy is going to school at the Rats of NIMH's new home, like their little commune. And he's still living with his mom. And in the new place where they moved the cinder block at the end of the first book. But he has to like travel to school because the rats have a school there now. And they'll teach kids how to read and stuff like that. And so Mrs. Frisby lets Timothy go. She's a little bit nervous about letting him go on his own. But he goes and travels. And along the way, he meets this other mouse he's actually a rat named Rasco, who we find out is the son of Jenner, who was like the leader of the splinter group that broke off from the Rats of NIMH and got electrocuted or whatever. Turns out Jenner survived the electrocution.
Oh.
And but as a result, became convinced that the world is too dangerous for rats, and so he went basically to live like a normal rat in New York City. I think it was New York City, a city. And so Rasco has grown up as like a city rat, kind of scavenging, and like he's very exposed to a lot of like kind of pop culture and stuff because he's able to watch movies and stuff. Whereas but he's also kind of like
It's like the country rats versus the urban rats.
yeah,
or
but he's not like an urban rat like the Artful Dodger, that kind of stereotype. He's like a kid who has no discipline, right? He's just like allowed to roam. And so he meets up with Timothy, and they both go to the Rats of NIMH. And Rasco doesn't really want to let on that Jenner is his dad because he's realized that Jenner is kind of like a, controversial figure in the history of the Rats of NIMH since he like kind of...
This is like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, basically.
Kind of, with less time travel. Rasco is basically the main character. Timothy kind of does his own thing. He's like a wonderkind at the school, and eventually he's a very Harry kind of character where it's like, oh, your dad was Jonathan. I was friends with Jonathan, and Jonathan was a perfect jock. It's like that. And Rasco is a troubled child at this school, and he's like too immature and too undisciplined to really fit in at the school until he kind of like learns his way. It's a coming of age story for him. And they eventually learn that like the rats have moved into like a basically like a national park or something. It's like a land that's supposed to be prevented from being developed on, which is one of the reasons why they want to move there. But they find out that some corporation is basically like twisted arms of the local farmers to like get them to develop there. And so they're going to dam up this river that's going to flood out the Rats of NIMH's home. And so they have to like figure out a way to like undo this. And there's danger and all that. And along the way, Rasco kind of learns how to become like, a self-sufficient member of society who is able to like have impulse control and like, do good for the common, benefit and all that sort of stuff. I thought this book was just okay. There's a distinct difference between the style of the two books, whereas like the Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH is, you have all these colorful characters and there's these kind of interesting big ideas. This one is very character focused, where it's like, you could make them not rats, and most like 90% of the book would work as just kind of like a almost moralistic like school tale, where it's about like this kid who has to learn lessons at school because like these bigger, wiser adults, are teaching him how not to steal and lie and stuff like that. And also like, I don't know, like there is in Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, as you talked about, Rebecca, there's a kind of spirit of collective, like we're all in this together, we're all helping each other. Whereas like in this book, and maybe this is more just because it's more character focused than the Mrs. Frisby book, and in Rasco, a lot of it is about like how individually you have to do good, and it's like very like virtuous and moral sort of like ideas about like the way society is good is if everyone does the right thing. And maybe I'm splitting hairs, but to me, in Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, there's a collective sense where it's like, what is good is for us to create a society that everyone can be safe in. Whereas in this book, it's what is good is when we create a society where people can act virtuously. And I don't know. I don't want to read too much into the early 70s versus the mid 80s in terms of politics or whatever, but it does you can sense that like difference in like what was kind of the vogue storytelling like interests of the time, instead of like social movements were focused on individuals and all that sort of stuff, instead of like communes were more focused on like people doing right and wrong, and it was just less interesting to me. I don't know that the writing style was any more or less complex. It was just the plotting felt a lot more prosaic in Rasco. And so I checked out both sequels from the library. I'm probably not going to read the second sequel because I just wasn't interested after the end of Rasco. That said, the rats learn how to computer program in this one. They like learn how to computer program and sabotage the like plans of the humans by hacking their computers, which is kind of funny and like very like mid 80s.
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, there's things to enjoy about this book, but I definitely think that Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH is much better.
Yeah.
So.
Well, next time.
Yeah, we went pretty long on Mrs.
That's
Frisby,
all right.
But
next time we're going to be talking about, is it 1986?
Yeah, I believe so. The same year as Rasco.
Yeah, the 1986 winner and one of my childhood favorites, Sarah Plain and Tall by Patricia McLaughlin.
Yeah.
So.
It's also Sarah Short and Sweet, as we've talked about, because this book is, what is it, like 70 pages or something like that?
It's pretty short. It's really good.
Yeah, we will be talking about that hopefully sooner than later. You've already read it, Rebecca.
Okay, I just read your notes and I was like, that does not sound right. Her name is Patricia McLaughlin. It's not Laughlin.
Oh.
So I was like, I don't think that's right, but I'm going to read your notes anyway. So,
it's a G instead of a C. Or a C instead of a G.
Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry.
Tune in next time.
Where we hopefully pronounce this author's name correctly. But yeah, make sure that if you've got any thoughts for us, you can reach out to us at newberrychronicles@gmail.com. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.